I never thought a sentence like that would wedge itself into my mind the way it did. I refused my husband's hug. She hadn't meant for me to hear it. She was just speaking into her phone, late in the afternoon while I was bent over the busted radiator in the corner of the bookstore. Her voice drifted over the quiet shelves like a note that had escaped a song, and for some reason, I froze. Maybe it was the way she said it. Not angry, not sharp, just low, almost ashamed. Like she was confessing to the walls instead of to the person on the other end of the call. That was the first time I noticed her. The store itself was nothing special. Dim light, dust in the corners, a bell on the door that rang too loud every time someone walked in. I did repairs for the place now and then, fixing leaks, patching up cracked plaster, whatever kept the shelves standing. She came in most afternoons, not to shop, but to linger, sometimes with a book in her hand, sometimes without. She looked too put together for this dusty shop, with her pressed blouses and the kind of perfume that never seemed overwhelming but always made me turn my head. I remember standing up from the radiator that day, wiping my hands on my shirt, and finding her watching me. Not in a bold way. More like she'd been lost in thought and only realized she was staring once our eyes met. She looked away first. Her hair fell into her face, and she tucked it back behind her ear like it was nothing, but the movement was slower than it needed to be. I pretended to check the radiator again, though it was already fixed. "Does it work now?" she asked finally. Her voice wasn't the same as the one I'd overheard on the phone. It was lighter, practiced, the kind of tone people use when they're determined not to show what's really underneath. "Yeah," I said. "Should hold for a while." She nodded, like she wanted to add something, but didn't. That silence stretched longer than it should have. I kept thinking, why would someone refuse a hug? The thought slipped under my skin, deeper than I expected. Not because I cared about her marriage. I didn't even know her name yet. But because of the way she'd said it, like she was already regretting it the moment the words left her mouth. The next day she was back, standing by the travel section with a book she wasn't reading. I almost didn't approach her. Almost. But the air between us the day before had felt charged in a way I couldn't forget. "You like traveling?" I asked, stupidly, pointing to the book in her hand. She glanced down at it like she hadn't realized what she was holding. Then she smiled. Small. Careful. "Not really. I just like the cover." It was a lie. Or maybe not. I couldn't tell. But I noticed the way her fingers pressed into the edges of the book like she needed something to hold on to. That smile lingered for too long. Or maybe I stared for too long. Either way, there it was, the spark. She slipped the book back onto the shelf, straightened her shoulders, and said, "You shouldn't be working too hard on that radiator. The shop doesn't deserve that kind of effort." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she'd said effort in a way that felt heavier than it should. Like she wasn't talking about the radiator at all. And when she left, the faint trace of her perfume stayed in the air. I found myself still standing there, staring at the book she hadn't read. And I knew I'd be thinking about that pause, her silence, her glance, the things she didn't say, for a long time. The radiator didn't need another look, but I found myself back at the bookstore a week later. I told the owner I just wanted to check my work, make sure the pipes were holding. The truth? I was half hoping she'd be there. She was. This time she wasn't wandering the shelves or pretending to read. She sat at the corner table with a notebook open in front of her, a coffee gone cold at her elbow. Her pen hovered above the page, not moving. She looked paused, not in the elegant, composed way she usually carried herself, but in that hollow kind of stillness that happens when someone forgets what they're doing. I walked over slower than I needed to, dragging the weight of a toolbox like it was my excuse. She looked up when I passed. "You again," she said. "Me again." Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. Watching, measuring. I couldn't tell if she wanted me to leave or stay. I busied myself with the radiator anyway, though I'd already memorized every inch of it. The quiet between us was heavier this time. Her pen scratched once across the paper, then stopped. "You ever fix something?" she asked suddenly. "And know it'll break again soon?" I turned, caught off guard. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was on the page, though her words had nothing to do with the notebook. "Depends," I said. "Some things last. Others, not worth the effort." Her lips tightened. She gave the smallest laugh, short and dry, as if my answer had confirmed something she already knew. Her hand brushed against the cup of cold coffee, but she didn't drink it. I noticed the faint lines around her eyes when she smiled, lines that didn't match the laugh she'd just forced. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her fingers tapping the rim of the cup, restless. They were elegant, precise, with nails painted a shade so faint you'd miss it unless you were staring. Which, apparently, I was. "You're quiet," she said, finally looking up. "You talk enough for both of us," I answered before I could stop myself. That earned a real laugh. Softer, warmer. It slipped out of her like she hadn't meant to give it. And in that laugh, I heard something vulnerable, unguarded. For a second, she wasn't the composed woman who floated through dusty aisles like she didn't belong there. She was just tired, the kind of tired that seeps into bones. Her smile faded as quickly as it had come. She tucked her hair behind her ear, that same slow motion as before, then glanced at the clock on the wall. I should go, but she didn't move right away. She just sat there, pen still idle, coffee untouched, eyes lingering on the radiator I wasn't really fixing. I looked at her, at the way her blouse sagged just slightly at the shoulder, the way her hands tightened around her notebook before she closed it. And I thought, she's holding back more than she's letting go. When she finally stood, she brushed past me on her way to the door. Not close enough to touch, but close enough for the faintest trace of her perfume to pull me forward a step before I stopped myself. "See you around," she said, without looking back. The door shut behind her, leaving the air charged, like a spark still waiting to catch. The storm wasn't supposed to last all night. That's what the weather said, anyway. But by the time the shop lights dimmed, rain hammered the windows like it had no intention of stopping. I'd stayed late to fix a faulty fuse box near the back wall, and she, of course, was still there, sitting at her usual table, a different notebook this time, though it looked just as empty. The owner had gone home hours ago. It was just the two of us, with thunder filling every silence. "You should go," I said, nodding toward the downpour outside. She lifted her head, weary eyes catching mine. "And walk into that." Fair point. I pretended to keep working on wires that didn't really need me anymore. The truth was, the storm outside felt easier than the quiet between us. Because this wasn't the same harmless pause we'd had before, it was sharper, expectant. Finally, she closed the notebook and said, almost to herself, "Funny. When I was younger, I used to love storms. Now they just unsettle me." Her words pulled something from me before I thought better of it. "Maybe it's because they remind you you're not in control." She looked at me for a long time after that. A look that wasn't polite, wasn't casual. A look that stayed. I swallowed, tried to return to the wires. But when she laughed softly, it wasn't because of what I'd said. It was something else. Something heavier. "You're too young to say things like that," she murmured. Too young. The words stung, but they also tethered me closer to her. Because if she'd noticed my age, it meant she'd thought about it. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. The name that lit up the screen, Mark, was bold enough for me to see. She didn't reach for it, didn't even flinch, just watched it vibrate until the ringing stopped. "Not going to answer?" I asked, voice low. She shook her head once. "No point." Her shoulders slumped then, the guarded composure cracking for a moment. She looked smaller, like the weight of something invisible was pressing her down. And I almost said it. "You don't have to carry it alone." The words climbed into my throat, right to the edge of my lips. But I didn't. Instead, I sat back, closing the toolbox with a loud enough snap to cover the silence. She startled slightly, then smiled like she needed to recover the space between us. "You're very thorough with your repairs." The line was safe. Neutral. A wall rebuilt in an instant. But then, she stood and crossed the room to the window. Close enough that when she leaned on the sill, her shoulder brushed against mine. Just barely. Just enough for me to feel the warmth through two thin layers of fabric. Neither of us moved. The rain blurred the world outside, thunder rolling in the distance, and for a moment it felt like nothing existed but that inch of space between us. I could have turned. I could have spoken. Instead, I stayed still, heart racing, breath shallow, as her phone buzzed again, and she didn't move away. The storm had passed, but the air inside the shop felt heavier than it had when the rain was pounding. She didn't leave right away. Neither did I. The radiator hummed faintly, the fuse box glowed steady, but neither of us cared about repairs anymore. She sat across from me at the small wooden table near the front window, the lamplight painting half her face gold, the other half in shadow. Her notebook lay unopened between us. For a long time, neither of us said anything. It was unbearable. Finally, she broke it. You ever wonder if you've made a mistake you can't undo? Her voice was low, stripped of the careful polish she usually carried. I leaned back, caught off guard. All the time. Her eyes lifted to mine then, sharp but trembling. Don't say that like it's the same. You're still young. You've got time to start over. I don't. The words hit harder than I expected. She wasn't looking for comfort. She was laying down a truth she hated. I wanted to ask what mistake? I wanted to demand who Mark was, why she ignored his calls, why her laughter always sounded like it was stitched together from broken threads. Instead, I said, you don't know that. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but the fight never came. Instead, she folded her arms, pressing them tightly against herself, as if her body needed to keep something from spilling out. The silence between us grew unbearable again. Every second, I thought she'd stand and leave. But she didn't. She just stared out the window, her reflection superimposed over the dark glass. Then, barely audible, "What are we doing?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even directed at me, not fully. It was a whisper aimed at the space between us, as if the question itself was too dangerous to face head-on. I froze. My chest tightened. Every possible answer swirled in my head. Nothing. Waiting. Pretending. But I couldn't bring myself to say any of them. She turned to me then, eyes searching, waiting. My throat went dry. I don't know, I admitted. That landed between us like a confession. Her stare held, longer this time, until I had to look away. The air buzzed with words neither of us dared to say. My hand twitched against the table, inches from hers, but I didn't move closer. Neither did she. Instead, she let out a shaky breath and leaned back, blinking hard as though she could push tears away before they started. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "To who?" I asked. She gave the smallest, saddest smile, one that broke something in me. "To anyone." The silence that followed was louder than thunder. And then she said it, so softly I almost thought I imagined it. I don't even know when I stopped wanting to be touched. It was late again when I found her there. The shop was nearly empty, a few stragglers lingering in the back, but mostly quiet. She sat at the same table, the same untouched coffee cooling by her elbow, though this time her phone lay face up beside it. I noticed the screen light up before she did. A voicemail notification. The name, Mark. She stared at it for a long time, unmoving, as if the phone itself might bite her if she touched it. Finally, she pressed play. The voice that spilled into the quiet was strained but steady. "I don't know what else to do. I keep trying. You don't answer. You don't come home early. You don't even want to be near me. I can't fight a ghost. If you're gone already, just tell me. Don't leave me holding nothing." She stopped the message halfway through, her hand trembling so slightly most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't cry, didn't sigh, didn't break. She just slipped the phone into her bag like she'd thrown a sheet over a cracked mirror. "Sorry," she said after a pause, her voice low, heavy. "You weren't meant to hear that. I should have looked away, pretended I hadn't. But I couldn't. You're not a ghost," I said. The words escaped before I could stop them. She laughed once, sharp, humorless. "That's exactly what I feel like. Half here, half gone. No one's fault but mine." Her eyes darted to mine, then quickly away, as though the admission had already exposed too much. I wanted to reach across the table, not to hold her hand, not even to comfort, but just to prove she was real. Flesh and bone, not smoke. Instead, I asked, quietly, "Who did you used to be?" She froze. It was the wrong question, or maybe the exact right one, because she looked at me then, really looked, like no one had asked her that in years. After a long silence, she said, "I used to be someone who was easy to love." Her voice cracked on the word easy. Just once. Something shifted in me then. Not pity, not desire, something else. Like watching a locked door swing open by mistake. She blinked quickly, as if to seal herself shut again, and stood abruptly, gathering her things. I shouldn't. I shouldn't say things like that to you. Her hand brushed the edge of the table as she turned, just inches from mine. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The closeness was electric, unbearable. She steadied herself, shoulders drawn, then whispered so faintly I almost missed it. You remind me of someone I lost. And then she walked out, leaving the words to echo in my chest long after the door closed. She came back after days of absence, though I'd nearly convinced myself she wouldn't. The air in the bookstore felt different the second she walked in. Not lighter, not heavier, just charged. Like both of us already knew we couldn't go back to pretending. She didn't sit at her usual table. Instead, she lingered by the travel section, her hand trailing along the spines of books she wouldn't read. I closed the box of tools I hadn't touched all evening and walked over. You disappeared, I said quietly. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. Maybe I thought disappearing was the safest option. I didn't press. We both knew why she was here despite that. For a long time, we stood between shelves lined with maps and guidebooks, the hum of the radiator filling the silence. She finally sighed, shoulders sinking. I've been unfair. Not to me. I answered too quickly. Her gaze lifted, soft but piercing. Especially to you. You're kind. You listen. You see me. And I've let that mean more than it should. The words should have stung, but they didn't. Because they weren't rejection, they were confession. I took a step closer, not touching, just near enough that the scent of her perfume reached me. Then stop fighting it, I said, voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, exactly, but with the weight of everything she couldn't name. You don't understand. I've spent years building walls. Years telling myself that needing anyone was weakness. And now, she stopped. Her breath caught. And now, I pressed gently. Her hand twitched at her side, fingers curling and uncurling. She looked at them like they belonged to someone else, then finally lifted them to the shelf, tracing the edge of a book without really seeing it. Now I'm tired of my own walls. We stood there in the quiet, her words hanging between us. I didn't reach for her, not yet. Instead, I waited, letting the silence stretch until she turned toward me. Her face was inches from mine. The kind of distance where every flicker of expression is magnified, where even breathing feels too loud. She searched me, like she was checking if I'd flinch, if I'd run, if I'd treat this like anything less than sacred. I didn't move. So she did. Not a kiss, not even an embrace. Just her hand, finally, hesitantly, resting on top of mine. Light, uncertain, trembling. But there. Real. I looked down at our hands, then back up at her. Her lips parted, like she wanted to explain it away, but no words came. And none were needed. We stood like that, two people holding on to something fragile but undeniable, as the storm outside began again, soft rain tapping the windows. For the first time, neither of us filled the silence. Because the silence was the answer. Looking back now, it feels almost unreal, like it happened in a dream I've been carrying ever since. But it wasn't a dream. It was a series of small, fragile moments that somehow changed me, changed her, and changed what I thought love even was. We never declared anything. There were no grand gestures, no promises sealed in gold. Just two people who met in the cracks of their lives, and in those cracks, found a kind of light neither of us expected. For me, it began as curiosity, an older woman in a dusty bookstore, guarded and graceful, carrying a silence I couldn't name. But somewhere along the way, that curiosity turned into something more grounding. She taught me how presence itself could be intimacy. That just sitting across from someone in silence could feel more like love than any word ever spoken. And for her, I think I gave her something she didn't realize she was missing. Not youth, not desire, but attention without demand. I didn't want her to be someone else, or to erase the weight she carried. I just wanted her to know she was seen, that she could still be reached. I remember the last time we sat together in that bookstore, the rain drumming softly on the windows. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. Her hand rested on mine, steady this time, not trembling. And for once, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't calculating her words or folding herself into composure. She was simply there, and that was enough. We didn't walk out into the night as lovers, not in the way people imagine when they think of love stories. But when she finally left, she carried herself differently, lighter, freer, like she'd shed a skin she no longer needed. As for me, I stopped searching for the kind of love that burns fast and blinds you. I started looking for the kind that lingers in the quiet, that teaches you patience, that reminds you a single glance can change the way you see yourself. Some people say you only get one great love in your lifetime. I don't know if that's true, but I do know this. Sometimes the most important love isn't the one that lasts forever. Sometimes it's the one that teaches you what love actually is. And that's what she gave me. Even now, when I hear rain on the windows, I think of her laugh, short, real, unguarded. I think of the way her hand felt resting on mine, like it belonged there, even if just for a moment. Maybe that's all love has to be, a moment that stays with you long after everything else is gone. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?